God. I get invitations every day, and probably so many of you. Invitations from people to join us up in that latest social network. Invitations to become part of our list or part of our community. We understand, I think, even better than the people biblical times about that invitation. And that's what I want to think about for a few moments this morning. It's Nathaniel that says, is invited to say, come and see. I started to think about, what do we see? And what invitations do we pay attention to? Do we pay attention to those general invitations that people say, come to my workshop, come to this? I think not. The invitations I pay attention to are the invitations that come from somebody I know, especially a friend, a trusted friend, or acquaintance in the family, who says, come and see, you have to see this. Or you should be a part of this, and generally they give very good reasons why. I thought about in terms of our text and who we are, and about the ordinary things of life. On the one hand, in the Epiphany season, our gospel lessons focus in on those things that happened in Jesus' life and out of the Gospels that make it clear that this is God. But on the other hand, as in today's lessons, it's often about ordinary people. I think John in this Gospel wants us to understand that it's ordinary people like you and me that Jesus uses and that issues invitations to come and know God. Think about that. This past week I was looking at some children's books about fairy tales. I love those fairy tales. And those children's books that I keep on my shelf are some of my favorite reading even when the children aren't there. And I realized one of the things that is common that I really delight in is there's always a reversal. Things start out one way in the fairy tale, and then they end up in another spot. It's the frog that becomes the handsome prince. It's the ugly duckling that turns into be the beautiful swan. And they go on and on. The characters start out one way, very ordinary, even ugly, and all of a sudden they end up the other. In a sense, that's how John writes his gospel. This baby came into the world as the Son of God to deliver the world. And he ends up that by the end of the gospel lesson, everybody recognizes who the true king is. And that Jesus is in charge of our world and our life, no matter what happens. In fairy tales, it's really a story of how things get changed. In John's gospel, in the life of Nathaniel, it's how the disciples are changed and transformed. So we know them. They're the heroes. They're the followers of Jesus, the first ones to recognize him and get to know him face to face and be with him for all the teachings and wisdom that he had to offer. To many of us, they're the heroes. The heroes of faith and heroes in the gospel. Of the church. Because of them, what's handed down to you and me, our faith and our knowledge of Jesus. The great writers of the Gospels and the truth of God that we might know. But you know in the story, they're pretty ordinary people. And I think about the wonderful paintings that we have of those disciples. And they're almost always pictured perfectly and heroically. When we read the gospel, they dressed and acted like pretty ordinary people. They weren't so unusual or different from anybody else around them, except that they became the followers of God and witnesses to Jesus. What about that about you and I? we ought to look to others, heroes of the faith. But Jesus is really to be found in us, the ordinary people of this world and a part of that. I thought about some of this as I was watching a little bit of what was going on in the past weeks in our world and in our country, in our own community. I started thinking about reading. I love this time of year and the focus of Martin Luther King Jr. And when I remember about that and reading over the years, some years ago, a little bit of his own autobiography, his reflection in his life, he always just commented, I am just another person that God has chosen. And while he spent his life, and many of us remember him certainly high profile, and some see him as a hero of faith and a changer of things in our community, I kept thinking about the fact he never did that. He never acted alone. He always reached out to others. He said, walk with me. Come and change things with me. He was clear about who he was. He was a child of God. He felt he was about doing God's work. And he felt that the injustices that he saw around him in his society and in his world not only were wrong, but God was calling him to be one part of changing. Still today, we look back at that example of faith, and we have to hear that. We celebrate his birthday, and there's going to be a lot said about him. And some of it will be making a hero out of him, and some people will still hate him for some of the things he said. But I thought about Nathaniel. I thought about Samuel, the first lesson. I thought about Paul, that second lesson. And I thought about you and me this day. That's where Jesus comes, and that's how God does his work with people like us. And I think sometimes when we make things too heroic, we sort of make those people bigger and larger than life. I think with the Bible, especially John, his gospel, wants us to understand is Jesus just coming to the ordinary people like us. That's how God works. And when we look around at the injustices in our world, when we look around at the injustices in our community, when we look at the things that are wrong in our families, in our neighborhoods, God is calling you and me to be the agents of change. To be the ones who invite people to come and know Jesus and enjoy that relationship with Jesus and with one another. I don't know where I read it earlier this week, but especially hit me. I remember sitting in my office and I was reading through some mail or maybe a commentary book, and then went home and watched for an hour at the war and the might and how many people are convinced that they can make people see it their way if only through violence, through war, through some sort of terrorism, whatever label you want to put on it, we can force them to see things our way. We can force them to lead our way and to obey me. And I remember in the reading, it never works. Violence never changes anything. It just simply makes things worse. And I remember some time about that when I was in the prison system, working there with a little bit with guards, and I was surprised to find out that among the casualties of our prison system just isn't the people who are locked up and the prisoners, and we often hear about the violence that takes place there. The damage that is done to people who work in the prisons, and the damage that is done to their families. The violence doesn't stop when they walk out the gate. And I thought about the violence around us, about the failure of war, about the failure of all kinds of intimidation and violence. It just makes things more complicated, it makes things worse, and it never works. It doesn't work for the oppressors and those who perpetrate the violence or advocate the violence. for the victims and it doesn't work for the rest of the world and the people around. But isn't it interesting? And we sort of have to relearn those lessons. Every generation, every conflict, every day of our lives. Nathaniel in the gospel lesson, well, his friend says, come and see, and he knows Jesus. And he meets Jesus, and he testifies to that. And we know in later life that he did it again, but we also read from history and church history. Nathaniel didn't always get it. He had those days and those times when he struggled with what God wanted him to do. I think John's gospel is written to you and me, not so much to tell us about Jesus as God, but to tell us about Jesus with you and all the power of God that belongs to you. As I said in children's sermon, Jesus knows your name, and Jesus intends for you to be involved in sharing His Word, to be part of restoration of relationships in family and community, and yes, to be part of restoring relationships in the world. The gospel, the good news about Jesus Christ, is the good news that He is with you. Ordinary people, every day. And it's you that He sends out to invite others to know God, to grow closer to God and grow in their faith as you share that faith one with another. And sometimes with stumbling and awkward words, but always God is at work. May we be a people of peace and building peaceful relationships and strong relationships with our God and with one another. May we be people of peace each and every day. Amen. Let us rise and confess our faith together for the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. We believe in one Lord Jesus Christ,